The morning mist hung heavy over Windsor Castle as Catherine walked slowly through the private gardens. Her black dress moved gently in the autumn breeze, and her eyes showed the weight of the past few weeks. She had always found peace in these gardens. But today felt different. Today, everything felt different. William stood by the large oak tree where they had often brought their children to play. His shoulders were straight, but Catherine could see the tension in the way he held his hands behind his back. They had both learned to carry their pain with dignity, but the recent loss had shaken them both to their core. The news had come 3 weeks ago, delivered by a palace aide who knocked softly on their private door. Catherine remembered the exact moment when the words reached her ears. She had been reading bedtime stories to Charlotte when William appeared in the doorway, his face pale and serious. That night, they had held each other in silence, knowing that their world had changed forever. Palace staff moved quietly through the corridors, speaking in whispers as they prepared for what would be one of the most emotional events in recent royal history. The phones had been ringing constantly with messages from world leaders, family friends, and millions of people who wanted to express their sympathy. But behind all the formal protocol and public duties, William and Catherine were simply two people dealing with profound grief. Catherine touched the small locket around her neck, a gift that held special meaning. She thought about all the moments they had shared, the laughter, the conversations, and the quiet times that meant the most. These memories felt both precious and painful now, like holding something beautiful that could break at any moment. The children had asked difficult questions that no parent wants to answer. How do you explain loss to young minds who still believe that love can fix everything? William had sat with George on his lap, choosing his words carefully, while Catherine held Louis close, feeling his small heartbeat against her chest. Charlotte had cried quietly, and Catherine had promised her that it was okay to feel sad, that sadness shows how much we love. As the day of the farewell approached, they knew that millions of eyes would be watching them. People would look for signs of their emotions, analyze their every gesture, and write stories about how they handled their grief. But this pressure felt secondary to their personal loss. They were not just representing the crown, they were saying goodbye to someone who had been part of their family's story. The palace gardens had witnessed many moments of joy and sorrow throughout history. Today, as William and Catherine walked together toward the chapel, they carried with them the love and support of each other, and the knowledge that their farewell would honor a life that had touched so many others. The ceremony would be formal and traditional, but their emotions would be completely real and human. The chapel bells began their slow, solemn toll as guests arrived from around the world. Catherine stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting her pearl earrings with trembling fingers. These pearls had been worn at countless royal occasions, but today they felt heavier somehow, weighted with the significance of the moment. William entered the room quietly, already dressed in his formal naval uniform. The medals on his chest caught the morning light, each one representing duty and service. He moved to stand behind Catherine, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. In the mirror's reflection, they could see two people who had learned to find strength in each other during their darkest hours. Outside their window, they could see the long line of cars arriving at the castle gates. World leaders, family members, and close friends were all coming to pay their respects. The guest list read like a chapter from modern history, but William and Catherine knew that the most important people were already here, those who had truly known and loved the person they were gathering to honor. The children were being prepared in the nursery by their trusted nanny. George, now old enough to understand the gravity of the situation, had asked if he could wear his special tie, the one with tiny crowns that made him feel grown up. Charlotte had chosen her favorite black dress and asked Catherine to braid her hair in a special way. Louis, still so young, seemed to sense the solemnity of the day, even if he couldn't fully understand it. Catherine thought about the speech she would need to give later. She had written and rewritten it dozens of times, trying to find words that would capture the essence of someone so special. How do you sum up a lifetime of love and influence in just a few minutes? How do you speak about personal loss while standing before the entire world? The telephone had been ringing all morning with final arrangements. The flowers needed to be perfect, the music carefully chosen, and every detail planned to create a ceremony worthy of the love they wanted to express. But beyond all the logistics, Catherine and William knew that the most important thing was simply being present and authentic in their grief. Palace staff knocked softly on the door to indicate it was time. Catherine took one last look in the mirror and saw her grandmother's brooch pinned to her dress, a small reminder that she carried the love of previous generations with her. William straightened his uniform jacket and offered Catherine his arm. As they walked together through the castle corridors, their footsteps echoed against the ancient stones that had witnessed centuries of royal ceremonies. Today would be different from any other event they had ever attended. Today, their public duty and private emotions would merge in a way that would test their strength and reveal their humanity to the world. The chapel doors opened to reveal hundreds of faces, all turned toward William and Catherine as they entered together. The silence was profound, the kind of quiet that speaks louder than any words. Catherine felt her breath catch as she saw the beautiful arrangements of white lilies and roses, chosen because they had been a favorite flower of the person they were honoring. Their children followed behind them, walking with careful steps that showed they understood this was not an ordinary day. George held his head high, trying to be brave like his father. Charlotte walked close to her mother, occasionally looking up for reassurance. Louis stayed near William, his small hand occasionally reaching for his father's coat. The music began softly, a hymn that had been specifically requested, one that carried memories of happier times and family gatherings. Catherine closed her eyes briefly as the familiar melody filled the ancient chapel. She could almost hear the voice that used to sing along to this same song during quieter, more private moments. As they took their seats in the front row, Catherine noticed how the light streamed through the stained glass windows, creating colorful patterns on the stone floor. It reminded her of a conversation she had once had about how beauty and sadness could exist in the same moment, how grief and gratitude could live side by side in the human heart. William sat straight and composed, but Catherine could see his jaw tighten slightly when the first readings began. These were words that had been chosen carefully, passages that spoke about love, legacy, and the connections that continue even when someone is no longer physically present. Each word seemed to hang in the air, heavy with meaning and memory. The clergy spoke with gentle authority about a life well lived and the impact one person can have on so many others. Catherine found herself thinking about all the private moments that the public would never know about. The quiet conversations, the shared laughter, the simple acts of kindness that had meant so much to their family. When it came time for William to speak, he rose slowly and walked to the podium. His voice was steady and clear as he began to share memories that painted a picture of someone who had been much more than a public figure. He spoke about wisdom shared during long walks, about gentle guidance given during difficult decisions, and about the unconditional love that had shaped their family. Catherine watched her husband with pride and heartbreak mixed together. She could see how much strength it took for him to stand there and share such personal thoughts with the world. When his voice wavered slightly near the end, she felt her own eyes fill with tears, but she also felt an overwhelming sense of admiration for his courage and grace. When Catherine's turn came to speak, she walked to the podium with quiet dignity. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the paper containing words she had written from her heart. The chapel was so quiet that even the smallest sound seemed amplified. The rustle of her dress, the soft breath she took before beginning to speak. She looked out at the congregation and saw faces filled with compassion and understanding. These were people who had known her family for years, who had watched the children grow, and who understood that behind the royal titles were real people experiencing real loss. Catherine began to speak about the personal side of someone the world had only known through formal photographs and public appearances. Her voice was soft but clear as she shared stories about bedtime stories read to grandchildren, about patient advice given during challenging times, and about the way laughter had filled family gatherings. She spoke about lessons learned not through grand speeches, but through quiet examples of kindness, duty, and unwavering love for family. There were moments when Catherine had to pause, when the emotions threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. During these seconds, she would glance at William and draw strength from his encouraging nod, or look at her children and remember that she needed to show them how to handle difficult emotions with grace. She talked about the special bond that had existed between grandmother and grandchildren, about how bedtime stories had become treasured memories, and about the way even small gestures of love had created lasting impressions. These personal details helped the congregation understand that beyond the public role, they were mourning someone who had been a cornerstone of their family's private world. The most powerful moment came when Catherine spoke about legacy, not the official kind that historians would write about, but the personal legacy of love, values, and memories that would continue to influence their family for generations. She explained how the lessons learned and love shared would continue to guide their children and their children's children. As she concluded her remarks, Catherine folded the paper carefully and returned to her seat. William reached for her hand, squeezing it gently in a gesture that spoke of shared understanding and mutual support. Around them, the congregation sat in respectful silence, moved by the honest emotion and genuine love they had just witnessed. The final hymn began, and voices joined together in a melody that seemed to lift the sadness and transform it into something beautiful. Catherine sang along, her voice mixing with hundreds of others, creating a moment of unity that transcended the boundaries between public figures and private citizens, between those who grieve and those who comfort. After the ceremony, William and Catherine walked slowly through the receiving line, greeting each guest personally despite their own emotional exhaustion. Each handshake and gentle word required tremendous strength, but they understood the importance of acknowledging everyone who had come to pay their respects. Their training in royal protocol served them well, but it was their genuine gratitude that touched each person they met. World leaders expressed their condolences with formal dignity, while family friends offered more personal comfort through warm embraces and shared memories. Catherine found herself particularly moved by the elderly guests who had known the family for decades and could share stories that spanned generations. These conversations reminded her that they were part of a larger tapestry of relationships and history. The children stayed close throughout the reception, occasionally tugging on their parents' clothes when they needed attention or reassurance. George asked quiet questions about some of the guests, while Charlotte seemed fascinated by the elaborate floral arrangements. Louis, growing tired from the long day, eventually found comfort in William's arms, where he could observe the proceedings from a safe and familiar place. Photography was limited and carefully managed, but the images captured would become part of history. Pictures showing a family handling loss with remarkable composure while still allowing their humanity to show through. Catherine's slight smile when greeting old friends, William's protective stance near his children, and the way they supported each other throughout the day all told a story of resilience and love. As the afternoon progressed, intimate conversations developed in small groups throughout the reception rooms. People shared their own memories and stories, creating an atmosphere where grief was balanced by celebration of a life well lived. Catherine found herself laughing softly at some of the more amusing anecdotes, remembering that joy and sadness could coexist even on the most difficult days. The palace staff worked seamlessly in the background, ensuring that every guest felt welcomed and cared for. These dedicated employees had also been affected by the loss, and their professional service was enhanced by genuine emotion and respect. Catherine made sure to acknowledge their efforts, understanding that this day had been difficult for everyone, who had been part of their extended palace family. When the time came for guests to begin departing, the farewells were heartfelt and meaningful. Many expressed how moved they had been by the ceremony and by William and Catherine's graceful handling of such a personal loss in such a public setting. These comments, while appreciated, reminded the couple that their grief would continue long after the cameras stopped recording and the guests went home. As the castle began to quiet down, William and Catherine finally had a moment to breathe. They stood together in one of the private drawing rooms, still in their formal clothes, but finally able to process the emotions of the day without the need to maintain their public composure every single moment. Evening came quietly to Windsor Castle as William and Catherine finally returned to their private quarters. The children had been settled into their beds after a day that had stretched far beyond their usual routines. Catherine sat on the edge of Charlotte's bed, stroking her daughter's hair as she answered one final question about the day before kissing her goodnight. In the nursery, William was reading a bedtime story to Louis, his voice gentle and soothing after hours of formal conversations. George, now in his pajamas, sat nearby listening to the familiar tale. These normal, everyday moments felt especially precious after a day filled with ceremony and public attention. Once the children were asleep, William and Catherine found themselves alone for the first time since early morning. They sat together, in their private sitting room, no longer needing to maintain the composed facades they had worn throughout the day. The silence between them was comfortable and understanding, the quiet of two people who had shared something profound and challenging. Together, Catherine kicked off her formal shoes and curled up beside William on the sofa. He loosened his tie and put his arm around her, and for the first time all day, they could simply be themselves without thinking about cameras, protocols, or public expectations. The emotional weight of the day settled over them like a heavy blanket. They talked quietly about the ceremony, sharing observations about moments that had particularly moved them. William mentioned how proud he had been of Catherine's speech, while she expressed admiration for his strength throughout the day. They also discussed how well the children had handled everything, and how important it had been to include them in saying goodbye. The letters and messages of sympathy that had arrived from around the world sat in neat piles on a nearby table. Tomorrow, they would begin the lengthy process of responding to each one, understanding that people everywhere had been touched by their loss and wanted to express their support. Tonight, however, these tokens of kindness served as a reminder that they were not alone in their grief. As the hours passed, they found themselves sharing memories that had not been part of the public ceremony, private jokes, quiet conversations, and small moments that had made up the fabric of their relationship with the person they had lost. These personal recollections were theirs alone, precious and private in a way that balanced the very public nature of their farewell. When they finally prepared for bed, both William and Catherine felt a sense of completion about the day. They had honored their loved one with dignity and grace. They had allowed the world to share in their grief without sacrificing their privacy, and they had shown their children how to handle life's most difficult moments with courage and love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and the ongoing process of healing. But tonight they could rest knowing they had said farewell in exactly the way their hearts had guided them to do.